Today, it's Edwin's Monday evening property rant. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, one that is post covering finance and property news. It's a Monday evening again, and Edwin is back, and we're going to have another rant. Edwin, good to see you again. Lots to rant about tonight.
There's lots to rant about, Martin, and it's like trying to shoot the bullseye, you're a really bad shot. So you're hoping that he ricochets somewhere close to the bullseye. That's what the government seems to be doing at the moment. Anything to deflect from the real issues, around government policies and government policies, not only of late, but of government policies that have been thrown at us for the last 20, 30 years that you and I have been talking about.
Well, of course, the property market is a victim of 40 years of stupidity on the part of state and federal governments, a lot of it from federal, but the states, I think, should bear a bit of a fair share of the issues. And chickens are indeed coming home to roost. And, I made a show yesterday, which is worth just referring back to, the property myth versus reality as financial pressures still build. And the point of that show was to highlight the fact that there's a lot of BS going on at the moment, particularly in the media. And, the latest reports on the auction surge, this particular one, hey, 3/4 of homes were cleared. No. Do the math. Number sold, 447. Reported, 591. Listed, 966. 447 over 966 is not a high number. And, the truth is, I don't know what the media is doing other than they just want to push and persuade more and more people that property is booming and, you must buy, because if you don't, then you're going to miss out. And the FOMO story, this was reported in another article here, it was a nasty collision of hate and housing. But at the bottom, FOMO, fear of missing out, is in full swing. And that's the problem. Edwin, that's the problem. I'm seeing it through my one-to-one conversations. People are being bounced into making very, very bad property purchasing decisions simply because they are listening to the media and they are being, surrounded by all of this waffle from politicians. But you got to peel below that. You got to actually ask the fundamental question: what is really going on? Because what's really going on is not what the media is saying is going on.
Look, 100%, man. And this is something that we keep on drumming into our followers and viewers over and over again, and also our clients, and those that seek our services. But it's really interesting how these to me are deflection points. The deflecting from reality. The reality is yes, that the market, the property prices are going up in most of the markets of Sydney, but not all. And not all types of properties are going up in value. Not all types of properties are properties that people should be jumping in prematurely or haphazardly without the proper due diligence, without all those safeguards, and also the simple fact that the selling agent is not your friend should be tattooed to your partner's forehead. So when you turn around to your partner and you say, "Hey, honey, do you think you think we should follow the selling agent's advice and bid an extra $5,000?" The first thing you see on your partner's forehead is the selling agent is not your friend. And that'll cost you and save you a lot of money. But look, there's a lot of deflection going on, and you've got to pump this because, as I've been saying over and over again, Martin, it's all about the fix. It's all about the candy. It's all about the simple fact that we've got a state and federal government that are hooked on stamp duty and all the taxes that go along with property. So you've got to create. The unfortunate thing is that you've got to create this void of or lack of existing property in order to push the newcomers both investors and owner-occupiers, first-home buyers, into the dock boxes that they need to build in order to in order to get the fix, the stamp duty revenues, the taxes on the way in, even post purchasing of the land, all the taxes and imposts that go with it, all the levies that go along with it, for the local governments, for all the council contributions and everything else. We need that. They need that fix. So in order to have that on the other on the other end of the funnel or the tunnel, is you've got to create these you've got to create this demand, and you've got to ramp up the demand and throttle the supply, and because as we said, it's all the deflection, and right now, we've got government policies that have been of recent years, where you and I talked about it in 2019, and I say this openly, and have been, we've had shared it openly as well before, and that is whether the Libs would have gotten in, whether ScoMo and his cohorts in the real estate arena got in, it was all going to be the same. Nothing was going to be any different. Look at what Albo and Partners Real Estate have done to the nation, to most of the capital cities, and how they've built the demand, and with the promise that they were going to taper down on their immigration policy, and then you got the mainstream media saying, "Oh, don't blame the migrants for the housing crisis, blame the millionaires." We're not blaming the migrants. We've never blamed the migrants. We haven't directly blamed the migrants. We're talking about policy. Then you've got Irish Statistics that put out that chart that's showing a huge percentage growth in overseas, in new migrants entering different parts of the Sydney region and markets. I mean, it's phenomenal what's happening, and of course now you've got also the AFR, Martin, talking Labor must buy into the debate of immigration and population. So when the AFR start pushing that narrative, it's time that the discussion needs to be had. You can't hide this anymore, but the government will continue to deflect, and because they need that fix, they need that rush, that stamp duty rush.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, I'm not anti-migrants at all. The truth is that Australia has been built on the back of migration, but when you actually have strong migration and nothing to support it, so no alignment of the home building program to be able to meet the migration targets, that you got more people coming in, but it's deliberate. That is the point. It is a deliberate process that has been effectively engineered over several parliaments. So this isn't just the last 2 or 3 years, although there's been a very significant ramp up. And it's quite interesting. There was a report that came out, Mapping Social Cohesion. And this report, which included the ANU and a few other players as well, was that 49% of people say that the number of immigrants to Australia is too high, significantly higher than the 33% recorded in 2023 and the 41% in 2019 prior to COVID-19. So, they conclude that Australians are now evenly split about the issue of migration. But the point is, migration without the support, and I don't just mean housing, but I mean the social programs, and also health and education and infrastructure and all the other nuts and bolts that you need to put together. Now, if we had a joined up piece of thinking that put all that together, we might stand a chance of being able to handle such strong migration. But then when you actually realize that migration is probably upticking rather than downticking, despite what the government would want to present, the recent national accounts, if you sort of impute what the numbers are, it looks like it's going up again. And of course, we had the overseas movements in and out, and they were stronger. Now, those are early indicators. But it does look as though the migration is going to be very strong. We've got 25,000 more students coming in over the next academic year as well. So you put all that together, and what you can say is that the government settings are still feeding the hopper. So more people coming into the country, which means that we have more people demanding somewhere to rent, or maybe somewhere to buy a bit later. And then that puts them in direct contention between those in Australia trying to buy, trying to find somewhere to rent. And, there's a natural consequence of all of this. And this is actually a chart that was published quite recently. How much more Aussie renters will pay by the time we get to 2030. And this is actually from CBRE. And they estimate that on average, you could be looking at a significant further rise in apartment rents over the next few years. Why? Because the fact of the matter is that we've got more people needing somewhere to live than we have properties that are available and accessible. We have very low, of course, construction levels, much lower than previously. And then the final point of the jigsaw puzzle and the types of property that now are being pushed into the market, the high-rise dog boxes aren't necessarily where people want to live either. So we've got this massive web of issues here. But the net result is, if you're an ordinary Australian and you're trying to actually make a decision about, should I try and buy a property or should I trade up or whatever, right? Particularly if I'm in the rental sector and my rents are continuing to rise, you're being confronted with this wall of news and noise to say, FOMO, buy now, buy now, buy now. And unfortunately, in my one-to-one conversations, I'm getting more and more people who actually have buyer's regret. So they bought something without doing the due diligence. They didn't actually get the necessary independent survey. They relied on the vendor advertiser. The survey that's the survey that's part of the marketing campaign. And unfortunately, for the cost of maybe $3,000 to $5,000 to get a decent survey done, they're now up for hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional costs than they thought. And they've got a property that is also not performing as they thought it might. And that's another issue that I think people are beginning to wake up to. This idea that property is uniformly rising everywhere is just, frankly, not right. It is actually a very different story when you look at it in practice. And quite often what you find is that the movements up are a little bit random, depending on where you look. And, as I showed in my other show, if you look at North Ryde apartments, they're actually still cheaper than they were 10 years ago. Cheaper. And that's not allowing for inflation. So effectively, if you bought in 10 years ago, you actually lost money. If you bought in a few years later, depending on where you bought, you're probably also underwater too. So this idea that all properties magically every few years double in value is just rubbish, which means people need to have much stronger discrimination on the decisions they take and the basis on which they make those decisions.
Yeah, just want to go back a couple of steps there, Martin. One is the building and pest inspection, an independent one. It'll only cost you between $650 to $750, depending on whether or not you want the thermal imaging to see if the stud walls have got any little nasties in there that because it's on a slab or the building inspector can't get underneath into the through the manhole into the subfloor area because it's not that high. It's only a few courses off the ground. So so when you look at those numbers, when you look at relative costs around Sydney, I can get them done for $750, a very thorough inspection. Our inspectors take up to from 1.5 hours to 2 hours to inspect the property, not the 15-minute in and out reports that you get from before you buy. The ones that are handed by the vendor's agent. Needless to say, that's thought with danger anyway. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that there are, as we've shared before, when different legislations come into play or replaced, regulations that for instance, the Residential Tenancies Act and the new regs that were enforced not too long ago. You and I spoke about it, and we shared and we told our viewers and our followers that there were certain parts of Sydney and certain types of properties that were going to be affected, and we were going to get a possible retreat in prices in those areas because of the changes to the conditions of the rental conditions that landlords could rent those properties, and if they didn't abide by those new rental conditions, well then the properties would be sidelined for anywhere between 6 to 12 months, that you can't rent it on the short-term market or under a fixed term lease. So that was going to put a bit of pressure on certain markets, in the Sydney region and outside of the Sydney region, further out, the outskirts of the Sydney region. And lo and behold, there are markets that we're currently looking at with our clients for, and the prices that are being asked for those properties are prices where they paid for freestanding homes. I'm talking about freestanding homes, Martin, not apartments, but freestanding homes that they paid for back in 2021 and 2022. Our offers are sitting in at more or less what they paid for, plus the stamp duty and a little bit of, a little bit that they've invested to spruce up the property. So in other words, the markets don't necessarily run upwards all the time. But you have to be aware, and that notion of, as I say over and over again, it's the notion of pushing it and creating internal confusion and internal demand by these these call them grants, call them strategies, whatever you want to call them, that the government dishes out at first home buyers. All that does is just stake up areas. But my theory is my conspiracy theory is has been all along, and that is you've got to create the demand in order to corral and push the people into the new developments, because that is where the government gets most of its fix from. If you want to buy a kilo of Colombian gold, you don't go to the ACT. You go directly to Colombia. That sort of stuff. So there you go to the source, and the source of the revenues for the government is the taxes on the way in, throughout the inception of the property, and on the resale and on the sale, and then uptake of on the other end. So you've got to create this demand. When I say you create it, you push and you force people to jump into the market that are holding other asset investment classes, and they see themselves that, hold on a minute, we're not building anything. So shit, I can't live in my crypto. I can't. The missus is putting pressure on me, to buy, and there's pressures all around. And then you've got all these other gimmicks and policies that are thrown at the industry, but for the reason other than to create that demand in order for the stamp duty revenue to come. I mean, that's on the surface. I mean, there's a lot more to it, as you and I know, but that's how, if many would see it that way, they would sit back. People would sit back and take a breath. And the unfortunate thing is, as you and I shared before the beginning of the rant, of many stories of people that have been caught out. And because they don't get their independent inspections done, they don't use professionals to work for them, rather than using the professionals that work for the vendor. Then they get caught out, or because they thought they were going to save a very small percentage, on the way through. And it ends up costing them tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's the sad part about about purchasing under that emotional pressure.
Absolutely. Emotional pressure is actually right. And in fact, a couple of the articles talked about the emotion, and there was a commentary, I think, about the new owners of Domain went around and looked at auctions, and they were surprised at just how much emotion is there seen in the auctions that are going on. And the other thing, of course, there are consequences of these decisions, and I continue to report my stress data. This is the latest to August. And you can see there that rental stress is still very high at about 75%, and mortgage stress has tripped up a bit. It's just over 51% again, so it's moved up higher. Now, that's a particular definition of stress, and people will argue with me as to whether it's a good definition or not, but it's been something I've run for a good 25 years now. And what that suggests is that a lot of people are actually getting themselves into quite deep difficulty with regards specifically to their ability to be able to service those mortgages. Incomes are rising, sure, although not strongly, but costs are still rising. And the costs of the rent or the costs of the mortgage are still very big because the average mortgage is still getting bigger and prices are still chasing up, which means you need a bigger mortgage if you're going to buy. So all of those things together keep the whole game in town effectively. And that's a real problem. And, if people want to know more about that, well, you can check out the live show. We're going to be live tomorrow. And in fact, I've got quite a few people asking for particular information about particular postcodes. So we'll be able to go through that. So check it out, Property Myths and Reality as Financial Pressures Still Build, tomorrow, 8 p.m. Sydney, if people want to check about that. But then there's the political story here too, right? So we've got a lot of people, again, I see this in my conversations, people thinking about their kids, and those kids now can't get into the property market, or youngsters saying, how am I going to get into the property market? And that then starts to get you into political debate about things like, for example, negative gearing. And, so I believe that we're going to see a considerable escalation in the politics of housing over the next little while. And in fact, you've been doing a bit of thinking about this, I think.
Yeah, look, and this is what we've said before as well. With I believe that the person, look, again, as I said, Mark, mark this conversation. Put it down, diarise it, and remind me in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, because this is where I believe the Labor government are going to come back in because of that. Because of that, that seems to be the biggest, the biggest flute that the Pied Piper can play, and the loudest flute that the Pied Piper can play to bring all the voters is the notion that the current government is going to, or any government's going to get rid of or taper down on CGT and capital gains tax. That is, and that really, and I believe that even from the conservative voting bloc, they're gonna pull a lot of the mums from the conservative voting bloc over to vote for the Labor government that's going to be pushing this to closer towards the election. And because why? Because mums are going to feel the worst and feel the saddest when it comes to thinking about their children not having a home of their own, not having a property of their own, the rental issues and all that. So I believe that they're going to pull. They're not going to tell their husbands who they voted for. They're going to sort of smile when they come out of the voting booth. But I think that that's going to be a pull. Look, we've got issues around. We've got issues around. Around immigration, yeah, that's created. But I think this is really just it doesn't pull in as much emotion and it won't pull in as much votes as getting rid of negative gearing, or getting rid of negative, or bringing it, confining it to one property, and also tapering down on capital gains tax, concessions and the like. I think that is going to be the winning message, and everything else. Yeah, it's going to pull votes here and there for different independents, but I think that's because you look at it historically, Martin. Historically, you look at it with over the last 12 years with the elections. What pulls a lot of the young people? What pulls a lot of the votes? What pulls a lot of more emotion, even amongst all the you look at all the chatter on Twitter and on other social media platforms. It's that to me is the biggest flute that the government's going to play. Notwithstanding the fact that the government obviously talks about it before the election, then changes its mind, then doesn't do anything for a while, sits back, talks about other issues, and then brings it back up again. Why? Why? Because the political industry and the real estate industry, those involved in the political industry, those involved in the real estate industry, must make up for the most, in my opinion, make up for being the most investors or the biggest pool of landlords across any other industry or even the rest of the industries put together. That's just my personal opinion.
Vested interests, you suggest? Well, it's interesting. Certainly, statistically speaking, there are more politicians with more investment properties on average than the rest of the population. And I think the other day I shared some information about which ones are at the top of the list. But you're right about this sort of, politicians switching from left to right, about a particular issue and, wanting to play something up, then dial it down. And another example of that, I guess, would be the productivity reforms, that all that round table stuff. You remember that? It's gone very quiet since then. It's funny, isn't it? And this article sort of made the point. They were talking here about the super tax reforms. There's this idea of the $3 million in super and above essentially being charged on an ongoing basis based on the incremental movement. So it's the price of the asset rather than actually a transaction. And it's interesting that this article suggests that maybe the policy is now a bit in limbo with no plans to debate it in Parliament and expectations within the government that it may roll back parts of its plan to tax paper profits. It's interesting that Ted O'Brien, the Shadow Treasurer, labelled the government cowards for going slow on bits of it. But watering down the budget, why? Perhaps because they're creating worry about some future retirees and undermining confidence in the retirement savings, possibly. Possibly it's to do with the fact that farmers in particular are kicking up a storm about this idea because, of course, they could be impacted. So it's a bit all over the place. And this whole idea, and just to underscore it, this idea of taxing unrealized gains would set a significant worrisome precedent. And I've always said that we should be very careful to really question this. And maybe the unrealized gains issue is now something which is being reconsidered. So my point about this, and it's something I see all the time, is right. We see issues bubbling up. We see politicians talking a big game, and then they sort of let it die away and pick on something else and something else and something else. And meanwhile, nothing much gets done. And for me, that's the political machine in action, right? And I've talked about performative politics in the past, and I've talked about announceables, but it's not about what they say or the debates they have. It's what do they actually do? And actions speak louder than words. And what are the actions? The actions are higher migration, higher property prices, and as you say, that a migration thing is bubbling away there, but maybe it will be the negative gearing and the CGT issues that ultimately will be the foundation of the next part of the debate. But, it's all over the place. And in the meantime, like I say, it comes back to ordinary people desperately trying to make sensible decisions in the middle of this maelstrom. And that's the problem that I think I have, that when I talk to people trying to make good decisions, they say, sometimes we've got to put our fingers in the ears and just ignore what everybody's saying and try and just make the right decision for ourselves. But when you do that, you have to make sure you make the decision on the right basis and not on the spun basis, whether it's politically spun or whether it's spinning in the media or the media, which is owned by the property sector, or the property sector owning the media. I'm not sure which way around it is these days. It's more and more complicated. So it's really hard for people. And then the final bit of the puzzle, Edwin, I'm getting more and more concerned about the lack of good information available to people trying to make property decisions. This is the other part, which, again, a lot of people aren't wanting to talk about. But it's harder and harder and harder these days to be able to actually get good, independent information about property dynamics in a local area relative to a few years now. So in some cases, the data has been sold to private vendors who actually then charge for it. In other cases, it's information that bubbles into the portals, but the portals aren't necessarily up to date and are rather filtered. And so it gets harder and harder for people to try and make good decisions simply because the information doesn't exist.
And this is why this is why I believe that. Look, and I'm going to give myself a plug. This is why we believe that our services and what we provide for our clients is becoming more and more invaluable. I mean, buyer's agency or buyer's advocacy is a new thing in Australia, relatively when you compare it to America and Canada. So it's something that people have just got to get their heads around. And this is why we have tools. Obviously, we spend a lot of money by way of subscription. We spend a lot of money by way of subscription. We were selling property and running property management teams as well. When I start comparing to the subscriptions that we spent on the sales side of things and property management side of things, we're almost spending just as much, if not more, on our because it's also becomes hard for us in a way to obtain the relative information and information that doesn't lag. And this is the problem. And as I've been saying, I know I've said it before, but I will be putting together a lot more information around this and around what the industry is doing in order to dial down the information that gets disseminated into the mainstream, because that is how you control an industry when there's less information available and effectively, or it takes longer for that information to come out. So it's going to be interesting how this arena is going to play out. But obviously, that was one of the reasons why I'm heading the way that our team is heading the way that we're headed. Sort of been sharing in dribs and drabs, and I'll have more up to dates coming forward. But I believe that we will be positioning ourselves in a way that we'll be able to get information on sales from one day to the next, if not within 48 hours, where it's very difficult to do, even when you when you subscribe to certain websites because of the lag time. But when you've got these massive portals that have got all the information on the back end, and now they're starting to make it available, but obviously through paying channels, which are currently, if you try to approach them on your own, it's a fortune. And when you're just trying to buy one property, well, you're not gonna subscribe to tens of thousands of dollars per annum in order to get information on a few or a dozen homes that you've inspected in order to make a purchase decision. So yeah, Martin, the landscape is certainly not in favour of the buyer. And not to mention the fact that we've also got actors in the industry that willingly and willfully hide or take a blind eye approach, or a deaf ear approach to material fact, which then costs the purchaser tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars moving forward. But this is the industry. These are the landmines that you have to navigate through in order to try and make a property decision. And then when the government policies stoke it so much that to create that fear and that emotion, for their self-interest, because their coffers are running low, and they've got to create all sorts of taxes and incentives in order for people to jump in. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones that are paying paying their ticket, and their ongoing pensions after they retire. I mean, we're certainly in hard times. And unfortunately, again, I'll say that with all due respect, that to our followers and our viewers and empathy, is that it's going to get harder and harder moving forward, because the way that we see it also from my perspective is that nothing is being built. Nothing is being built, or very little is being built. You see articles and you read articles, and we talk about articles talking, 100,000 here, 10,000 there, 75,000 here, blah blah blah. And when we actually get to the nuts and bolts, it's only a handful of properties that have actually been developed and been handed over to physical occupants, from the government side, let alone developers. Developers, as I said, developers are still sitting on their hands, mate. We shared it earlier. We said it earlier, and we broke it, and we said it, and people starting to finally come to terms with it and realize it. Is that developers are waiting for greater handouts before they put a shovel to the ground and start taking that risk as they see it. And why not? I mean, this is it. This is when you've got the developers' foot on the throat of the government, and the government's got their tentacles in our wallets. I mean, here we are. That's the unfortunate thing. And then you've got Martin. Then you got the crazies running the asylum when you got the RBA and people that make decisions around the economy and that affect obviously property prices and the RBA reports of the RBA not knowing what to do with property prices, as said by former deputy governor. That's crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is absolutely, and the article here about the Reserve Bank might be more cautious because of the rate cuts may not be coming. Why? Because people are spending a bit more, and the growth was a bit stronger, etc., etc. But then, as you say, some people are saying, well, maybe the RBA doesn't know what they're on about. So it is really interesting. And, let's face it, I've been quite critical of the RBA for a long, long time because they don't seem to me to be really locked in with understanding what real households are doing. A lot of their modelling is based on securitized mortgage portfolios, which are not necessarily the same as ordinary mortgage portfolios. And they take this sort of averaging approach. But Michelle Bullock this last week was saying, well, incomes are up, property prices are up, the wealth effect's running, so everything's good, which of course may mean that interest rates aren't necessarily going to come down as quickly as people were expecting, which of course then puts more pressure on households and all of those things. Actually, Edwin, it's very interesting if you look at the article specifically relating to what the RBA was talking about, or at least being criticised, 2 points. Where did the RBA get the inflation targeting idea from? It actually came from New Zealand. They were a pioneer of it. The 2% was, to my mind, always just weird. Why 2%, not 3% or 1%? It probably isn't useful. And the other was here, what can the RBA do about property prices? And there's an interesting little observation there about asset prices move much faster than inflation. We've seen that, of course. And what's fascinating about this point is that you could argue possibly that the RBA is more responsible for the growth in house prices because of the fact that the interest rate and inflation conundrum drives prices. And what I find really very annoying is that, of course, the RBA says, well, nothing to do with house prices, it's to do with policy over down the road in Canberra. But actually, the RBA is as responsible for anybody for this mess, not least because they took interest rates really, really low and then promised they'd stay there for a long period of time when they didn't. And that, of course, trapped a lot of people, which I'm still seeing in my surveys, that people actually were locked into mortgages that were astronomical. And the RBA says, oh, nothing to do with it, we'll wash our hands of it. But to me, they are partly responsible.
Yeah, and when they make those silly decisions, they try to overcompensate on the other end. So you've got a seesaw effect, affecting different asset classes and different. And obviously, as I said earlier on, they don't know how it affects or what to do with house prices, because they don't really incorporate it in a lot of their data anyway. But is it intentional? Is it ignorance? I'd sort of tend to sway it more towards the intent rather than ignorance. Like the other point there, like you said, mentioned earlier on, was the fact that there's a lot of great things that, with respect to that, came from New Zealand, from the shores of New Zealand, and in the late 80s, early 90s. So the now question is will we take on those innovative steps that New Zealand took back then to be at the forefront? And will the current governments and the ones to come, would they take the same steps that New Zealand's taken with their immigration? And that's obviously tapered down on property prices. I mean, will or won't they? But definitely, they were pioneers, and yeah. But again, but it's interesting how you got now retired RBA bodies are spilling the beans.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting. Of course, the property prices in New Zealand have dropped quite considerably. They tightened the migration and also restricted some of the lending criteria, which actually reduced demand for mortgages. It's interesting, though, that more recently announcements in New Zealand from the political end of the spectrum suggest they're now trying to reignite house prices in New Zealand because, of course, they can't allow property prices in New Zealand to fall. And Adrian Orr, of course, who was the New Zealand banker governor, New Zealand Reserve Bank governor, disappeared quite quickly for no apparent reason, and they're now waiting to appoint the next one. So I think that we're going to see maybe it'll be that New Zealand says, "Oh, actually, we've let property prices fall too far. We can't have that. We need to find a way of reigniting them." And then they'll look to Australia and say, "Of course, migration is the lever that we need to actually pull again." I suspect it might go that way. Now, just one other little point. We were talking earlier about the rental situation and the fact that the expectations of rents going up. And I said that the rental crisis was there. 75% in the rental of households in the rental sector were struggling with their rents. But there's something else which I think it's just worth delving into, specifically relating to the personal information that those applying for rental properties, are in the middle of. And there was this article that came up, and the amount of personal information that Australian renters have to hand over is, quote, staggering. Many renters have little choice but to hand over excessive amounts of personal information when they apply for properties. While some states and territories are making moves to address this, others are lagging behind. Now, I have not heard anybody so far discuss this, but this is a biggie.
Yeah, look, well, you haven't heard anybody else other than you and I. We've been talking about this for quite a number of years, and even before you and I started doing the Monday evening property rant, and I was still running the rent roll. Back in with the agency there, I was very critical and very vocal about the information gathering process that that was at hand, and the amount of information that was handed over willy-nilly. More to the point, I was very critical as to what was done with that information and how it was handled, how it wasn't protected. Now, we've gone a step further, obviously, to save costs in the industry. We've gone a step further, and many officers, both franchise groups and independents, have basically moved to the side of outsourcing the data. They've tacked towards outsourcing data in order to save costs. And as I've shared before, Martin, this data is either collected in India. A lot of it's done with data centers in the Philippines. Now I'm hearing that there are data centers are opening up in Vietnam, and obviously India and the Philippines, because of the English or the language bridge there. It makes it easier to collect, but a lot of it is also done with services that are provided by IT companies, and a lot of it's people are handing over through different platforms, even on domain and real estate. Don't know how that data is secured, and guess what? All to save costs, all to save money. It's the question is I know some of the legal eagles that I know, they've just gone through a big education seminars with regards to the insurances around cybersecurity, and it's a big thing. And if you don't have the right measures in place in your office, in your business to protect the theft of personal information, you could be in a lot of trouble. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, but yet the industry has moved a lot more to this. Now, they've even gone a step further. Now, a lot, and we've shared this before when last year on the show, where certain, quite a number of, again, officers, independent and both franchise officers, independently of the head officers, they've gone out and outsourced the not only the data collection, but also the tasks that a property manager had to perform. And that is the ingoing inspection reports, the periodic inspection reports, and the outgoing inspection reports. So effectively, what you've got, you don't have your property manager or the property officer from the real estate office that you're paying the rent to. That's the property's being managed by. You don't have them performing these tasks of the periodic inspections. In New South Wales, a landlord, by way of the property manager or themselves, can perform up to 4 inspections a year, one every 3 months. So let's say, on average, agencies, property management teams perform one, or a little bit less than one per every 6 months, and that is being outsourced. So now, not only do you have total strangers and overseas characters getting your valuable information, but you've also now got strangers going into your property, with office keys. I mean, this is insane. This is crazy, in my opinion. This is a crazy development of what goes on in the industry, but yet the industry demands more in rents. Landlords are demanding more in rents, and there's less protections for the tenants. And they're demanding higher prices for sales, and the selling agents are doing a lot less than what they should be. And my bugbear about the auction campaigns and the short campaigns, and how much agents are getting paid when you break it all down. This is a wrong trajectory, in my opinion, and not the right move. So, look, if you're a landlord, you should be really considering. You should be asking yourself who is who and what, because guess what? Insurances are uncovering offices for a lot of this stuff. And one way or another, if anything should happen, landlords will get roped in to different claims.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very important point. And of course, the fact is that if you are in the rental sector and you're looking for somewhere to rent, you almost will do a double pipe backwards to be able to find somewhere. So when you actually come to think, do I want to share this information? Well, you will, because you need to find somewhere to rent. So it's almost like you're forced to disclose all this information. But who asks? Where does it go? Who looks after it? Is it secure and safe? And as you say, on the other side, if you're a landlord and the information actually gets out there, what protections have you got? So this is a really critical point. And again, it's one that we focus here on the Rant, but haven't seen much in the mainstream. Now, there's another interesting observation here, and this sort of comes to the next big chunk of conversation today, and that is, clearly we have a budget problem in this country. There is too much government spending. A lot of it's going potentially in the wrong areas, and we have this productivity loving that didn't really produce anything. But of course, now we're getting to the reason for it. And of course, Chalmers set up, as part of the output from this conversation, the intergenerational war between the haves, property owners, and the have-nots, people who want to buy property. And this is, to my mind, an intentional political decision by the Labour government to bring intergenerational tensions to the fore. Why? Because ultimately, here is the point. There is an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is the $50 billion tax break that could help solve the housing crisis. And guess what? This is about effectively looking at taxing the family home. So, this is where we're heading, Edwin. This is where we're heading to. And all of the other stuff is just mere, well, it's a mere positioning to be able to get the big prize. At what point will the family home effectively be a target for tax?
Yeah, and this is the interesting part. There is I mean, it is after all a what 8.1 trillion dollar industry that they're salivating about. And like, as I shared earlier on, we talked earlier on. I mean, property gets taxed when you buy. It gets taxed on the way through, and it gets taxed when you sell, and then it's rinse and repeat, and and the cycle goes on and on. So it's a gravy train. It's something that's there to be taken. But the interesting thing is, what does the government do with it? Well, what does the government mainly do with it? And and governments tend to fatten up their paychecks and have 21-year-old TikTok influencers getting $230,000 per annum, and they call themselves ministers or whatever else, and that's that's what we're getting. That's what we're getting. And when you start questioning their experience, they tell you they've got 21 years experience of life. Life doing what? Picking their nose when they're toddlers, and getting up to mischief in the teenage years. I mean, I'm not just picking on the Labor government, but also there was a similar scenario with the Liberals before as well. But this is what we're getting. Career politicians that have had no real experience in running anything other than running from the bed to the fridge to get themselves a snack whilst they look at themselves on TikTok and on Facebook and every other social media post. It's crazy.
Absolutely. And, I keep talking about the fact that politicians don't want you to look over here. They want you to look over there, whilst they do stuff over here. And that's really and look, the pointy bit of this, the NDIS. So, of course, we know that one of the biggest drains on government coffers following defence and AUKUS, which is another thing that I think we should be very concerned about, thinking about the amount we're likely to commit to spending over a long period of time there for maybe a sub, maybe not a sub, there's no guarantee. But the NDIS, and this sort of was brought to life this week when Chris Mims, the New South Wales Premier, said that he won't be intimidated by Health Minister Mark Butler. The state and federal governments could face a major funding fight over the NDIS and hospitals. And of course, what they're trying to do is to strip out some of the costs currently covered by the NDS and put it back on the states. So what they're doing is moving the expenditure problem rather than actually trying to solve the expenditure problem. And this is a classic yes minister solution to the problem, right? The NDIS had some laudable aims, but when you think that 1 in 10 youngsters are now inside the NDS in some way, according to some reports at least, and when you understand the growth of costs in the NDIS, you've got to ask yourself the question, is the design and execution of this fit for purpose? Probably not. But is the solution simply moving bits of funding out of the NDIS into state governments any way to solve the problem? No, it's not. And yet, here we are again with more performative politics, with more, well, we'll move the pie around a bit, and it's like the pea in the 3 cups, right? You move it around and you hope that nobody notices, but you're not tackling the fundamental issue. We're spending too much taxpayer money on things that probably aren't the most appropriate way, the most efficient way, and the most effective way. And you could look at aged care, and you could look at the health care and a whole bunch of other things too, education being another one. So this is a really big question, right? It isn't just about the quantum of spend, but it's about the way that it's spent and the effectiveness of spending. And here, state and federal politicians need to take the blame for massive inefficiency and massive stupid spending. And who pays? The taxpayer, of course, because the share of income tax continues to rise. The bandings are still frozen, so as income rises, people pay more tax. And then, of course, Chalmers is now targeting things like the family home and superannuation over 3 million. Got to find additional money to come in. No, wrong question, right? How efficient is the money that we're spending? And are we spending it on the right things? That's the question we should be having, but that's not the question Edwin wants to run with.
Amen, Martin, and that's it. And then you go back to rings and repeat, go again, or for what? And will they taper it down? They won't taper it down because there are too many bodies in management roles, too many bodies in committees and in think tanks and in everything else that are being are taking a slice of that pie. And they've got the hand in the cookie jar, and it's too big of a honeypot. Too big of a honeypot because I was talking to one of our clients that's actually getting accredited to become an NDIS provider, and the reason why she's becoming and her family becoming moving in that way is because from her background in helping the elderly, helping the disabled, she was able to obtain a license under the NDIS and able to be an NDIS service provider because she saw that the service providers that were looking after her own family and her elderly relatives were charging for lawns that were supposed to be made, were charging for services around homes, were charging for all sorts of expenses. But yet nobody's come within cooey of the properties or to assist them for months on end. But yet in the statement they were being charged exorbitant amounts of money, and things were only getting worse and worse. And that is why she decided to go down this path so that she can basically tell everybody else that's allegedly providing a service to elderly family members, tell them to nick off, and she'll start managing those services for them. So it's a big rort. It is a big rort, and isn't any wonder that this is why things are going. And then you've got these monies that should be flowing towards infrastructure and creating creating the infrastructure that's required, whether it be educational or health infrastructure in the outer regions or the areas that are being developed, so that there can be a decentralizing of these facilities in the built-up areas. But there's nothing in the coffers in order to throw that way. So I mean, it's a vicious circle, but it's a crazy place that we're in.
Absolutely. And I always come back to a simple principle, which is that every dollar of taxpayer money that is taken off people, the politicians have a responsibility to make sure that it is spent efficiently and appropriately. And at the moment, they're not. But what they are doing is getting the big bucks in terms of their incomes. When they were parliamentarians. And the civil service, of course, pays more than a lot of other private sector players. And, of course, they have these big superannuation facilities too. So they're doing very well for themselves. But what does it mean for ordinary Australians? And the fact is that ordinary Australians are working harder, they're being taxed harder, and their incomes are not actually growing in real terms. They've not been growing for a long, long time in real terms. And in the meantime, it's the politicians who are sitting back and enjoying the fruits of their labour and their multiple investment properties. And if you want to talk about the intergenerational issue, it's not the youngsters versus the olders. It's the politicians and the hangers-on versus everybody else. And it's about time that we spun the magnifying glass on them and their activities rather than it being deflected by them to other sectors. And end of rant from my end, but this is a really critical, important thing, and I get so frustrated.
Martin, you're just being the right wing racist.
Probably so. Oh dear. Let's move on to the let's rather quickly. So, if you look at the numbers, and we use the domain definition here of the Sydney region, as you know, on the 1st of September, there were 20,591 properties for sale in the Sydney region. A week later, on the 8th, 21,207. And so we're starting to see a bit of a rise. And here's the charts. And it's really fascinating. So this is the chart of 25 versus 24 versus 23, the listings. Listings are higher this year relative to last year and the year before. Well, that's a very interesting observation, Edwin, isn't it? Based on what we're seeing in all the newspapers about nothing for sale.
Yeah, look, they're starting to climb there. But remember, when you start really looking at it from a granular point of view, we said that a large portion of those, which is effectively 2,500 or thereabouts, that were running higher than last year, the majority of those, in my opinion, are made up of land lots that nobody wants to buy. Same time last year, we had under 1,000 land lots, and now we've close to 3,000 in the Sydney region, which is a lot of vacant blocks of land, and nobody willing to buy it because of the cost to build. But it certainly, as you mentioned earlier on, Leah, when you start drilling down and you start seeing what is available and what's not available, you look at the mix, you look at okay, we've had a few more homes come on the market, but we're still only just a tad over, 9,088 homes, freestanding homes for sale in the Sydney region, which is bugger all. Followed closely by 8,230 apartments, 921 homes, and then you've got 2,667 blocks of land. But overall, historically, it's still low. But fingers crossed for those that are wanting to get into the market that the spring season is going to bring out a lot more properties on the market for buyers to choose from. But we'll see. We'll see how the numbers pull. But the Melbourne's a different story altogether, though, Martin.
Yeah, Melbourne is really interesting, and I was a bit surprised at this because if you look at the 25,730 properties listed on the 1st of September, and then you compare that with the 25,151 on the 8th of September, the trend's a bit different there. I wonder what's going on.
Yeah, look, the apartment numbers have certainly have crept down, but overall, if you look at the mix again of freestanding homes and apartments, they're pretty much on par. The difference has been in that we've had a drop in land envelopes there in Melbourne, but look, at the end of the day, Melbourne's still teetering on the edge. It's really on thin ice. Those that are going down there to buy, and you hear of all different investment seminars, and as I said before, where we've been offered to buy to market property down in Melbourne, high rise developments in Melbourne, and you simply can't. They're overpriced, and it's pretty much you're better off buying something that's established than something that's coming off the ground. Not knowing what you're going to buy, not knowing what you're going to get at the end. But yeah, look, Melbourne's an interesting landscape. Brisbane, on the other hand, is steady as she goes. I mean, it's really close to the 3,000. Last week, and and just a tad more this week. But overall, the numbers are have been tracking very, very low in the Brisbane region, which is putting that huge demand, and you get a lot of chatter online on different platforms how disgruntled the Brisbaneites are.
Yeah, and prices in Brisbane are still rising. Though again, I have an interesting conversation the other day with somebody who bought in Brisbane with one of these high-rise apartments quite close into the centre of the city. They're actually now sitting on a loss, which is interesting. So it's not universal. And the reason, of course, is that there's a lot of new builds going on in and around the same area. And in some cases, people prefer new rather than a second hand. So it's interesting that perhaps some of the existing unit holders in the Brisbane area might actually not be sitting on the sort of profit that they think they are. So just a little observation there in terms of what's going on the ground. With regard to the auctions, the story, of course, is that the auction count is up a little bit. We said earlier on that the clearance rates are nothing like really reported. And I think this next chart is the killer, really, in terms of if you look at the start of spring in 2024 relative to the start of spring in 2025. Well, what do you see, Edwin? What do you see?
Well, the thing is, Martin, that I don't believe the confidence is there for vendors to really go out on to the market because of the bad publicity, and also because they're not achieving, or the neighbours aren't achieving the high prices that the agents have been telling them, and albeit for the main purpose and the main reason of pushing the marketing campaigns and the short marketing campaigns, which feeds the selling agents on the way through. Either way, there are a number of markets in the Sydney region that have a very, very low clearance rate. The eastern suburbs, the Bondi region being one of them, where you've got a very low clearance rate around there. And we've discussed that in the past. But overall, now, just to be clear, these numbers that we get from this website is a website that scrapes the domain listed auction numbers in the domain Sydney region as per domain. So the discrepancy or the difference between the numbers that we've been sharing over the years and those that get shared on the weekend, although be it a domain report, they sprawl the numbers, or they spread out a lot further than what the domain region does. So these are this website is keeps it steady, and that they scrape the actual online listings. But when you start comparing it to last year, Martin, we've got, it's a huge difference, almost 40% drop in the actual listing numbers on market. So the confidence levels, in my opinion, are way down. Obviously, because they're not achieving the prices that the agents are telling them that they're going to achieve. So that puts a lot of doubt in the vendors' mind, which is, look, it's not a bad thing from our perspective, because it just means that people have properties are going to, and it's not a bad thing from a vendor's perspective as well, because it just means that the agents are going to have to spend a bit more time to earn their crust, right? And it gives us, from the buying side of things, a bit more time to do the due diligence that's required in order to make these decisions, particularly in the areas where auctions are very prominent, and you're paying $2, $3, $4, $5 million for at an entry level to get into that area.
Yeah, very interesting. And as with all of these things, the statistics and the way they're presented can really determine how people think things are. And that's why the auction clearance rates, as reported at the weekend, are always hot. When you look at these statistics, then you think, oh, maybe not so. And then when you actually listen to what people are doing, there are still a smaller number of people thinking they're going to go to auction. More people are seeing through the agents' BS with regard to what the price should be versus what they can achieve. And we're still seeing this idea of underquoting, or whatever you want to call it this week, Edwin, still being a big part of the mix. But, auctions are not necessarily the best means to actually get the best price for many people, I think.
No. And auctions aren't for everybody. Interesting, Martin, you and I have had our discussions as to why we believe the numbers are low. And over the course of the week, last week, I was able to have a chat with Ray Ellis, the CEO of Century 21, and I got a video of his thoughts on why the auction numbers were low. And it's not dissimilar to what you and I have been talking about, but he adds a couple more points. So, Ray, what I've noticed over the last 3 to 4 months is a drop of about 35 to 40% in actual auction numbers, sale of properties by the auction process. Could you give us a bit of your insights into what you believe that the reason is why that is happening?
It's a very good question, and it's an issue affecting everyone throughout Australia, not just in the Sydney metropolitan area. There's a lack of stock in Australia. Demand for housing is a record numbers, and we have lots of reasons for that: increasing in population, migration, expectations, downsizing, upsizing. The property market is always not a state of flux, but a state of transition. And when you have a transition, the majority of people move within a 5 to 10 kilometre radius where they live already. They don't move interstate, of course they do, but not in great numbers. So when they're looking for a property to buy, they want to be in their local area. And when there's a lack of stock, that delays their decision. It puts it on the back burner. So therefore they're not going to auction, they're not going to private treaty, they're not going to expression of interest until they see that there's availability of something they want to buy, which is either for downsizing, upsizing, or a number of reasons, as I said. So until the stock increases, and we're starting to see that with spring coming up now, which is a traditional thing that what happens, but the supply of stock, the supply of construction of housing and apartments throughout Australia, not just in Sydney, is the major issue. When people see what they can buy, they're prepared to sell, because it's a transaction in life, and that's what drives real estate. So good numbers, but that's the reason why.
So taking that information on board, we have noticed in terms of numbers in the Sydney region according to Domain, and these are all Domain figures I've been using for the last 3-4 years to look at the stats. The actual numbers per se in the Sydney region are actually running higher in 2025 than 2024. However, if you drill down, if you look at it, from actual properties on market, what a lot of people that haven't realised, that haven't cottoned on to, that there's a huge volume of land sales, which is skewing the numbers somewhat. So I agree with your point, and that is the actual established homes on market and apartments or townhouses is a lower percentage. We've got a higher demand, but there's a lower number. So what's skewing the overall numbers is the land lots, which builders and people don't want to build because there's no money in building.
It's costly. It varies from state to state, but the average cost of building an apartment or a new house and land package, almost half of those costs are taxation, and that's driving a lot of builders and developers out of the market. High holding costs with interest rates, even though there's been a couple of cuts. But what you were saying is true. So big land sales that happen on the fringe of Sydney, out at Kellyville or Glenmore Park or the start of the mountains or Stanhope Gardens or whatever, they're big developments of lots of land sales. That doesn't affect the actual amount of stock that's coming on in Burwood or Ryde or Epping or somewhere like that.
And that's where you got your traditional auction markets.
Yes.
Is your inner hubs, established areas. Correct. Your eastern suburbs, your inner west, your North Shores.
Well, I'm glad you've drilled down on it, and your clients would great benefit from this expertise, because it's not just a financial decision, it's the rationale for where they're buying and what they're doing. And the services you and Melanie provide certainly give people that information. And I commend you for it. And I thank you for doing it.
Edwin, that was really interesting. And not least because, of course, he's right in the middle of the property action, and he's seeing it, well, rather similarly to what we're seeing it in.
Yeah, and as much as he's also got to stoke up the sales side of things, but look, it's not dissimilar to in a lot of ways what we've been sharing. But it's rather interesting to hear it from the CEO himself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing that. And, it does, I think, highlight the fact that when you actually listen to some of the more reputable people in the property industry, particularly those, who know what's going on, they're much more balanced than the spruikers and the media reports. So, interesting object lesson there. Not all real estate agents are the same, which is worth bearing in mind. We'll just quickly look at the rental numbers just before we close out. So in Sydney on the 1st, 10,301 listed for rent in the Sydney region, 10,318 the week later. And in Melbourne, 11,199 on the 1st, compared with 11,225 on the 8th. So just a slight rise in terms of rentals. Of course, it's a bit of a seasonal thing too. But again, Edwin, I'm still getting more stories of people who are actually confronted with considerable rises in their rents for the place that they're currently living in. And then they're caught in this dilemma. Do I just pay up, or do I try to find somewhere else and join the queue of 30 people looking down the road for another property you'll probably end up paying more for? It is a horrible dilemma for people. And I really feel for those caught in the rental sector at the moment.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I have been very measured about over the years, and not only looked at the sales or the listings or the property economics side of things, but also the rental arena and how it affects 1/3 of the population, which is that it's very sad, and it's only now that the mainstream are picking up on your surveys that you and I have been talking about, how the hidden issues of people not moving, not wanting to move, paying the extra, and of course that is not picked up in their reports, because it's not a new bond. It's the existing bond, and except you're just topping up the weekly repayments as people are being issued with the rental increase notices. And as you say, because it's very difficult, and will you get a property in the same area? Will you get a property close to the school that your children go to, or close to the hospitals that you need, or the medical centres that you require, or the transport that you require in order to get from your property to work, and so on and so on? It's crazy. It is, and this is something that the government just don't understand and don't address. Is it willful ignorance, or is it on purpose?
Well, and of course, the key point is that none of those are advertised rents, because the most of the mechanisms are looking at advertised rents, rather, in other words, the vacant properties that are available, not an existing rent that's put up. So that's hidden, that's secret, that nobody knows about that. And that's the problem I've got with a lot of the official statistics. Well, finally, Edwin, as we come to the end of the show, it is that time of year. Temperatures are on the up. Something to think about.
Yeah, it's that time of year. It's the time of year to look at your changing the batteries in your smoke alarms, and also looking at your gutters, or talking to your strata managers if you live in a strata complex, or a medium-sized development strata complex, townhouse or villas that you're surrounded by trees and by nature, that you need to start cleaning up and prepare, because we could end up having a very hot and windy summer. I still think it's going to be a wet one in a lot of for a bit of the time, but it's the heat and the winds that drive those fires, and time to clean those gutters, folks. That's my tip for the week, because that's what I've been doing this weekend.
Yeah. Well, remember, my house in Thurrool had flat roofs, and every spring I would go up and basically blow off all the leaves and clear all the gutters, because, of course, it doesn't take much for sparks to come over if you get one of those fires down the road. And we had a few while I was in Thurrool. And I remember a few years ago, I actually made a video of the whole process of going around and cleaning and proving that it was clear. And somebody said at the time, well, that is at least good, because you've got a video that shows it was clean. So if there is a problem, the insurance company won't have any comeback. So if you clean the gutters, take a photo too.
Yeah, that's right, if you can. I forgot to take the phone up there, but
Send the drone up afterwards. Edwin, a very interesting conversation this week, as always, as we move into the spring selling season. I think the next few weeks will be really telling in terms of what happens in the local markets there. So I'll look forward for the next rants, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful week.
Likewise, Martin, always a pleasure. Cheers.
See you later. Bye-bye.